Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Catherine Matthijs, the founder and CEO of Civility Partners. We work with organizations to adjust their culture. We specialize in toxic cultures often. And I'm super excited to have a colleague here with me today, Aaron Marshall. Aaron does a lot of the similar work, but differently. And so I'm excited to learn more about Aaron. He's also a fellow LinkedIn Live course author. So thanks for being here with me today.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to chat. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me,
and
Catherine.
what's that?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And just to give everyone a little bit more background, Aaron is the COO at the Santa Barbara Zoo and a talent optimization consultant. And he's also got a master's in philosophy and a PhD in experiential education. And he's a lifelong learner. He's also working on his EMBA. And he's got a book, Habits for Leaders, coming out. And he also writes kids' books. And I'll put those links in the chat here shortly. But I want to jump right in. So
Let's do it.
everybody's looking at the great resignation. Everybody's wants to bring their whole self to work. That's a big thing right now that we've seen into the lives of everyone's living room. We really want to be whole selves now.
Yeah.
So in terms of culture, which is something that world that we're in, how does this new way of really wanting for people really wanting to be their whole selves, how does that impact culture and culture building? Where do we go from here?
Yeah. It's a really complicated question, right? I think, from a foundational perspective, there was a Gallup study that came out maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And Gallup identified four key things that people and organizations are looking for from their leaders. They're looking for trust, stability, compassion, and hope. And I think in terms of thinking about what does it look like for people to show up as their whole selves, like we need to create a context, sort of healthy soil for cultivating that culture. And that healthy soil, I think, boils down to those four things. Like, what are we doing to build trust? What are we doing to build stability? Compensation has been a huge issue over the last year and a half. Big part of the resignation. Culture and switching to hybrid work. What does that look like? How do we fit into that world? What about people that can't work hybrid? Like all of these things sort of fit into this stability bucket in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think compassion and hope. What does that look like? It has been an exhausting like 24 months we're almost up on.
Yeah.
And what does compassion and hope look like in the midst of that? What does stability look like? How do we build trust when like we don't even know what's over the horizon, right? And it's a short horizon. So
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think? How do you kind of get folks to show up authentically?
Well, my thoughts are, in terms of hope and trust, you have to be super transparent. And I've started sharing more information about our financials, quite frankly, with my team, and it's just like, here's where we're at. And it's no secret. And, here's the role that you play in getting to the number we need to get to. And here's the number I need you to focus on your end. And so I've gotten more, I'm a small team, so it's easier to manage a little bit, fly by the seat of your pants, but I've gotten more focused on the numbers so that I can be more transparent versus this is what I'm thinking in my head. So that's my answer. I also think, and I've been encouraging all of my clients to really open up with their feelings, and that whole self piece involves vulnerability. And because people are vulnerable. I don't know if you know that, but it's like we have this, like the old work-life balance is like, it suggests, even the way it's written, there's work and then the slash and then life. And we suggest, or that suggests that work and life are different. And we know that's been fading away with technology, but it's not work/life anymore. And in fact, life is work. What we do for a living is a big part of who we are. So I think we've got to just say at work, you can be vulnerable and a real person. We don't need you to have some sort of facade at work, and then you go home and then you can be emotional, which is how it's been. That's what we're trending away from. So, and in my world of toxic work environments, I've often talked about being harassed and having to report that is a very vulnerable place to be. And if HR folks want people to report something that makes them feel vulnerable, we have to make it okay to be vulnerable. So those are my thoughts.
Absolutely.
What have you been
And
talking to your clients about?
well, I think you're spot on with the vulnerability bit. I mean, I think, and in working with executives in particular, the question is how can you start that path, right? How can
Mhm,
you lead the way to being vulnerable? We talked about the idea of help a lot.
mhm,
Um, what is help? Is it something we give or something that we ask for? And there's vulnerability in asking for help. And I think a lot of times leaders rise up through the ranks because they're really good at providing help and providing solutions and providing answers.
mhm.
And if somebody looks overly competent, sometimes it's really intimidating. And so having those people ask for help, having those people look for input, having those people be a little more vulnerable, even in their
Mhm.
personal lives and sharing things that they maybe wouldn't have previously.
Right.
Just a great way to build trust and develop teams. And I think, as you're talking, I'm thinking particularly the last couple of years, we're still wearing these around the zoo, especially in indoor meetings. And talk about a metaphor for how folks are engaging life at work in uncertainty. I mean, we wear masks. I had a chance to run a retreat last weekend, and it was with a number of students, and their instructors were blown away because we were out. I like to do some team building games and use that to kind of process different ideas. And
Mhm.
the instructors said afterwards, this is the first time this year that we've seen their faces, and just seeing your faces and getting the
Yeah.
nonverbals associated with how people are reading you and responding to you.
Yep.
It's really hard to be authentically there and show up if we're not able to engage with each other in unmasked ways.
Yeah, it's quite the irony. People want to be their whole selves, and also you must wear a mask. It's
Right.
so those things don't work together. That's for sure. Yeah, and
Yeah.
especially too, a lot of new employees who have joined an organization in the last couple of years maybe have never met people in person, and that also makes it difficult to be authentic. Part of your whole self is like your whole body. Like, how tall are you? You know,
Mhm.
I met someone the other day I'd never met in person. And I was like, oh my gosh, you are so short. I did not see that coming at all. But it's just like, oh, okay, so this is what you look like.
Yeah, so this is a little bit tangential, but one interesting connection to what you're talking about right now. My son's in junior high, and we've been getting a lot of feedback from the school that this year, uniquely, eighth graders are much kinder to seventh graders than traditionally they've been. And this is not like a localized
Oh,
phenomenon. That we're seeing this in a lot of different schools that have been experiencing, Zoom education, and a
uh-huh.
lot of it boils down to how we're separating out that ability to sort of have power over, and some of it is as simple as like, hey, this kid's 6 feet tall and this kid's 4.5 feet tall, and they're totally friends and they're looking at each other and they have no idea, and then when they meet they've got this foundation of relationship, and there's no judging and comparing and trying to step away, and so they've already kind of stepped into, and educators are hoping that this is a trend that'll like roll forward now, because the seventh graders have been trained to behave in a particular way that's
Yeah.
different than the narrative that's gone on for decades.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's something to that, like that show The Voice. The whole point is it doesn't matter what they look like. We're just going to
Hmm.
focus on the voice, or
Yep.
blind interviews so that we try to keep our bias out of interviewing people. So yeah, there's definitely something to that. That's an
Yeah.
interesting phenomenon. Hopefully everybody's gotten kinder because we have been through the ringer. So kindness is certainly really needed right now.
We need more kindness in the world,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
So I'm curious to hear from you because we're both in the world of culture. So I'm super excited to talk shop with you here. Um,
Yeah.
One thing I say, and then I saw it, I think somewhere on your website, that culture feels fluffy to a lot of people. It
Yeah.
feels intangible. You try to sell a CEO on culture change. It's like, well, there's no P&L line item related to the
Sure.
ROI in a lot of ways. So what are some of the things that you do in your world to make culture tangible? What are some of the action items and projects that you work on?
Yeah, so kind of two words that feel really fluffy, I think, to your point, are culture and values. So
Mhm.
kind of taking values first, we're pretty good at identifying these lofty words that mean something somewhere, but we're not really sure what they mean to everybody. And so one of the processes that I like to use with organizations is to move them from just throwing out a value to sort of identifying what does that mean to us, really kind of nailing that down, And then imagining, like, what does that look like in our organization right now? Because often the values that we aspire to, they also exist in some form. That's why we're aspiring to them. We've sort of hired people in ways that fit that culture that's emerging, especially in a
Mhm.
startup. I work with a handful of startups, and so kind of seeing that culture emerge. We work with an organization that's been around for a few years, and then they go, "Oh my gosh, we don't like have official values. We don't have like a mission statement, and we've just been doing this and growing organically." Like, okay, well, you probably do have a culture, right? Like
Yeah.
cultures just happen. So what are the values that are there, and is that what you're aspiring to? And in nailing that down, looking at the people that embody those values makes it a little more tangible. And it
Mhm.
also allows you kind of an entrance into moving from values to behaviors. So as you're establishing a culture, what are the behaviors that you want to see?
Mhm.
Culture is simply like how we do work together, right?
Mhm.
Like at the base level, how are we agreeing to do work together?
Mhm.
And what I've found is the more explicit you can make that, the healthier the culture is going to end up being. Because when we have these hidden bits of our culture, these little implicit pockets, it takes a long time to onboard somebody. They got to figure out, like, how do I really get work done? And if you can
Mhm.
make that explicit, and it's just a lot easier. So having those behaviors at hand, having those pathways at hand, those processes, and you know this in your work, but this boils down largely to clarity and alignment, right?
Mhm. Yeah. So, what are some of the ways that organizations can bring their core values to life? Because you and I both know lots of organizations have core values, but then they don't really mean anything, or they don't live by them. And I always am fascinated when I go into a toxic culture, and the core
Mhm.
values on the website are like respect and inclusivity and leadership, and I'm like, well, if you were actually living these, then I wouldn't be
Then I
here.
wouldn't be
So
hiring.
let's
Yeah,
wipe those out and start over.
right.
So what are some of the ways that you're helping organizations bring those core values to life?
I think you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's deconstruction, right? It's
Mhm.
like, hey, what are the people in your organization seeing? What are they feeling? You think you're showing up this way, but maybe you're not. Like, what does that look like, and how do we get at that? So, at a really practical level in larger organizations, one of the ways to do that is to set up active and safe feedback loops,
Mhm.
so that you have information coming up. Leaders that want to affect change often get in their own way, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I get in my own way. And so it's feedback that helps us get out of the way a little bit and say, oh man, I didn't realize I was showing up like that. What do I need to do to shift?
Yeah.
And so that awareness piece is a big part of it. And then I think clarifying, like, what does respect mean to us? What are we
Mhm.
really agreeing to when we say our culture is about respect?
Mhm.
Because respect means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And one of the LinkedIn courses that I did talks about this a little bit, and I use this analogy of folks coming to a trailhead with a bunch of backpacks loaded up with stuff,
Mhm.
and it's all the baggage that we have from our previous work experiences.
Mhm.
And it's sometimes helpful to say, like, okay, well, what trail are we tackling right now? What's the peak we're trying to ascend? Let's take those backpacks off, figure out what we need to keep. Like, let's talk about what actually is valuable in here. And
Yeah.
let's just take that stuff. Let's get rid of the other stuff. We'll leave it right here. If we need to come back for it, we can. But
Yeah.
but let's lighten the load, get focused, and move together.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I see that all the time. In fact, in one of my trainings, or one of the exercises that's in quite a few of our trainings, is that very thing. How do you want to be treated at work? Is one of the questions we
Mm.
ask, and respect is, of course, often one of them. And then, then I say, okay, well, this is a nice word. You've all said it, but what does it mean? Let's hone in on the definition, and then then that really highlights what you've just said, that everybody has different ideas. And it's fascinating, in some organizations, when we do that exercise, their responses are very similar.
Mm.
And then other times, not at all. So one training I did, I remember everyone said that I feel heard, was essentially. So it's like, okay, here at this
Mm.
organization, respect means that the person walked
Yeah.
away from the conversation feeling like they were heard. So now we can define that and use that as a real behavior and a core value, versus others when it's all over. And then we got to say, okay, well, we need to figure out where we go from here. So I'm curious about
Yeah.
some of your lead. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think what you just mentioned there is really critical too. Oftentimes, we think of core values as a list of 6 words or 5 words or whatever it is, and I think honing in on that and figuring out what's the phrase that actually says what we mean by that word is really
Mhm.
important. So if it's like respect, doesn't do much for me, but if you come into an organization, they say, look, we agree that we're going to hear each other well.
Hmm.
oh, okay, I can get my head around that, and I can even ask questions about, like, I haven't heard that before. What does that mean? How does that look? And
Yeah.
what about when there's a power differential? How do do you have to play political games? How does that work here? And you can sort of suss out the details of how these
Yeah.
things are at play.
Yeah, and then you can measure people against it too, hold people accountable to it, right? That I'm
Wait,
hearing people feel
accountability?
like,
Whoa,
yeah,
whoa, let's not
I
get
know, it's
crazy.
a whole new world. It's like core
Yeah,
values 4.0.
yeah. Wait, are we gonna like hire to this too?
Yes,
Man,
totally.
I don't know.
I was just thinking of it because the other day, on Friday, I was in a networking, or it's a strategic planning kind of a day. And so, of course, core values and culture was part of the conversation. So I had my hand up every 3 seconds. But someone had said, how do you measure people on these things? And you can't measure core values. I'm like, yes, you can. So
Absolutely,
I'm like, sorry if I'm
absolutely.
annoying everyone with all of my conversations. I'm curious about your leadership coaching, and so it. For correct me if I'm wrong. I think
Sure.
you're going into organizations, you're working with leaders to help them make sure they're defining culture and sending the messages out and living the culture they're wanting to put out there. And then you're
Yeah.
working with teams as well to help make sure that everybody's on the same train. Is that? Tell me more about what you do.
Yeah, I think so. I think of talent optimization as that intersection between the culture building and the strategy.
Hmm.
So, it's on the strategy side, like, do we have the right people in the right seats? Do we have the right goals in place? Do we understand what we're aiming at? And then on the culture side, how are we agreeing to do work together? And how is that? What's the intersection benefit of saying, because we have this strategy, we're going to agree to work together in this way, and these are the positions we're going to hire. This
Hmm.
is the level of person we need at these different positions.
Hmm.
So it's the marriage of those two ideas. So kind of moving away from the culture eats strategy, for
I
breakfast sort of
like that.
quote to, like, hey, these are actually both really important, and they create a really beautiful tapestry when we have an organization that's healthy and moving quickly to achieve goals.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that phrase. Everybody loves it. I love your mug, by the way.
Oh, thank you. This is a local Santa Barbara nonprofit.
Oh, okay. My friends
Yeah.
make fun of me with my giant civility partner mug, but it's not coffee, it's just water. If it was coffee, I
Mm,
would be all over the place. I would be speaking very fast. So one question I wanted to ask you too is around kind of strong cultural ethos and how do you maintain culture? How do you, let's say you achieve the pinnacle of culture, how do you
yeah.
maintain that?
Yeah. I think, and we could spend hours here, right?
Hmm.
It's one thing to sort of deconstruct and then get back to a healthy road, but I think it's for an organization to maintain the trajectory that they want to be on, you really have to establish some support systems. And we've talked about a few of those things, and I think we could fly through a whole list. So I'll throw out some stuff, some that's interesting, and you want to talk more about it, let me know. I think,
Okay.
you know, I'm I'll say it again, clarity and alignment. Like, I think that's my. You remember the movie Hitch, and they talk
Yes.
about, like, the safe space for dancing. It's like, just keep it right here.
Yeah.
Like, when I think about culture, it's like, look, can we get clarity and alignment down? If we get that down, like, we're probably going to be in pretty good shape. Um, Assuming positive intent. When you're in an organization and you're working towards building trust, sometimes it can be really hard to assume that other people are trying and
Hmm.
that they mean well in what they're doing. And we just know as humans that we're really good at not judging ourselves for our behaviors because we know our own intentions, but we're really good at judging others' behaviors because we don't know their intentions, and so we impute negative intentions, right? We fill in a bad story, and so how do we undo that? And I love the way Brené Brown talks about that a fair amount, and others. Um, what does it look like to really clarify roles? How do we, if we want to have an organization like at the Santa Barbara Zoo, we're 200 to 300 employees, depending on the season.
Hmm.
And we've got maybe 10 different businesses in a zoo. You got your food, you got your retail, you've got
Right.
your animal care, you got your animal health, on and on and on. And folks have to work together across those lines, but we need to have clear lines. So we can't have folks in this lane that are switching into this lane and then back,
Hmm.
unless they're only switching lanes because they've been invited over to help with a particular project. And we have to have that collaboration. But when
Hmm.
that lane switching has an expectation that now it's mine, that gets really challenging and that can clutter things. And so having clarity about those roles and expectations is really important.
And
Um,
communication.
Yeah.
Communication. Yes.
Yep.
But then we're back to vulnerable. You can't communicate in the best ways until you are able to feel vulnerable.
Yep.
I noticed that we have some comments, so I just wanted to. I was so enthralled with what you were saying, I was missing them. So Michelle says she discovered that someone was pregnant that she didn't see on Zoom. So back to our earlier
Wow.
conversation about
Yes.
meeting people, like, oh my gosh, you're pregnant.
Surprise.
Didn't know that. Then with some other, let's see, Nikhil says also having regular performance feedback conversations and open door policies. These are all definitely
Yeah.
important ways to maintain culture, and the communication keeps coming up that
Yep.
we have to feel comfortable to communicate. It's all tied together. It's all coming full circle.
I think so. Two things that haven't come up yet. I would say ground rules. Like, how do we establish ground rules for meetings and for different groups of people? I found that to be just a really easy way to set the table as you come into something. Doesn't take long. People can get used to doing it, and it's a nice way to just say, "Hey, we're here again. We agree on this. Okay, let's roll." And I would say, and this might just be because I work at Zoom, but one of our core values is to have fun together. And I think one of the best ways you can keep a check on a healthy culture is by scheduling play dates. So whether that's like one-on-one or with your team or with cross-functional teams, whether it's, throwing cornhole, whether it's, having a happy hour, a full-scale party. We've done like, parfait in the morning. Hey, everybody take a 10-minute break, come down, hang out, and then get back to it. But just having these relational opportunities to connect, they're really important. And that's honestly, that's one of the biggest challenges of remote work. How do we build space for real relationship building, those deeper connections that help us be real?
Yeah.
And I would say, as you think about leading, and this is really challenging for leaders, because I think, most of us know or are aware that our title enters the room before we do. And so there's a different context when you come in. And so it takes a lot of work to mitigate that power differential. And these sorts of opportunities, a number of folks that I've talked with would say, well, yeah, we set up these happy hours, but I don't go because I want the employees to enjoy themselves. I don't want to feel like their boss is there. And to be honest, I think that's a real miss. I think, those are an opportunity to be real, and to show up and take off your title and to have a real family or a real hobby or whatever it is, and to build those connections that help build trust.
Yeah, you can't trust someone if you don't know anything about them other than their title. I completely agree with you. I got to share, I'm very excited for tomorrow. My team and we had a really great year last year. So we are celebrating by taking a day trip to Vegas because we're in different places and Vegas is the middle. So we're going to meet there and we're going to have a fantastic lunch and we're going to do the giant Ferris wheel thing, the little pods. And
awesome.
We're doing a show and then go home. But yeah, I'm pretty excited. Speaking of social events.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What show are you going to see?
I don't know. My executive assistant planned the whole thing for us. But it's a hypnotist she thought would be fun. So she said she was going to try her hardest to get me on stage. And I'm like, oh. We'll see.
That's a great way to celebrate with the team. Well done.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just like holidays are kind of crazy. And it's like, it's our holiday party / congrats to us for having a good year last year. Claire has mentioned psychological safety, which is something, I talk a lot about, obviously, in my toxic world over here. I'm curious about your thoughts on that phrase and how does that come up in your work, those kinds of conversations about that.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with that phrase as a phrase, but I can imagine, if we're talking about safety within a work context, I'm typically working with leaders, and so it's back to that power differential and approach of care and assuming positive intent and thinking like, what does it look like for us to trust well, and then to create other space for feedback. So, I know that as much as I try to be kind or generous or to open opportunities, that it's difficult for folks to always share with me what's actually going on. And so how do I work to create alternative routes for people to do that? How do I work to build relationships that allow the other in that relationship to remind me when I'm not showing up the way that I need to show up? So that I don't have blinders on and I'm not just powering forward with a goal, but I'm really attending to reading the room and understanding like how I show up in ways that are unhelpful.
Yeah.
The reality is, we're all people with good habits and bad habits, and these things take time to change. But I've found that employees are really generous, team members are really generous, bosses are really generous when they can see that you're making attempts, and when you're able to acknowledge that that you're not always safe. And so, like, hey, let's work on that. What does that look like? How do I show up differently?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
That's a great.
there's probably more to unpack there. So I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, psychological safety is about that whole self that and it's been something in like the academic research for quite a while, this idea of, essentially you have to feel safe to speak up, and you can't learn unless you feel comfortable to ask a question, or if you have a bullying boss and you've learned some new process, you're going to be pretty timid trying that out if you're afraid to make a mistake because your boss might yell at you. So but then it kind of got popular a few years ago when Google released a study about the effectiveness of the teams in Google. And what they found was the number one quality that the highly effective teams had was psychological safety. So it's this ability, or it's about not fearing consequences for asking a question or having an idea or for being yourself. So it definitely fits in this conversation we're having. We're back to that thing of vulnerability that, if I'm going to come in and, share something going on in my personal life because it's keeping me from being super engaged today at work, I have to feel psychologically safe to share that with my boss. And I think, then we're back to the work-life balance conversation, right? If an employee comes to me and says, for example, I had a huge fight with my partner this morning, I'm not really in it, I'm going to get through some work, but I need some time to decompress and stuff, and I say, fine, you get that project done or that thing done that you need to do for that client that's due today, and then go. They're going to feel much more comfortable to share stuff like that with me versus, nope, your hours are 8 to 5 and you can leave at 5. So we're back to that work-life integration. It's not, you have to stay here till 5. I'm happy to have them. I don't like, what are they going to do here? I'm going to pay them to sit there and stare at the screen. I'd rather them go home and feel better.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
we got to get out of that. The old way. The old paradigm is just shifting.
Yeah, it's been super relevant, hasn't it, the last 2 years, as we think about trying to do work from home with kids at home and all the craziness of COVID.
Yeah.
So Jim Collins talks a little bit about this notion of conducting autopsies without blame. And I think that sort of fits in this space. I don't know if you're familiar with that notion, but
no.
Accountability in an organization does require us to step in and have conversations about situations where we need to improve the work. But we don't have to do that in a way that's off-putting to the folks that were involved in the work. Right? We can come in and go like, look, let's step back from this thing. The goal here is forward-looking. Like, where do we want to get to, and what do we want the next situation to look like? And so what can we learn from this situation? And then next time we've got a roadmap that helps us get a little bit closer to the target the next time. And I just love that notion of autopsy without blame. I think it's an easy to remember.
I like that. I'm going to have to, it sounds like a good blog post title. I'm going to have to look
there you go.
Akbar has a good question.
Good to great.
It's in good to great. Okay. That's the second time that book's come up this week. So I think I probably need to pull it off my shelf and revisit it. Yeah. Akbar has a question. He says, it's human to expect more. How do we maintain that? So I feel like, Akbar, I need a little bit more context, but maybe you, Aaron, have an answer. And I know we're coming right to the end, but let's get to his question if we can.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I can throw an idea out. I don't know if this is tapping into what you're asking specifically, but Giant is a leadership group. They have this tool that sets up a grid, and the idea is, look, you've got 2 axes. One of them is challenge and one of them is support. And so they say, how can we become a place where, as we interact with employees as leaders, we're encouraging a culture of high support and high challenge? Because it turns out that support without challenge creates some issues, and challenge without support creates very different issues. They're both bad. And if we're passive on both ends, which often leaders are when things get hard, and we say, well, we're not going to support and we're not going to challenge, we're just going to tap out, that's really bad. So how do we get up into that top quadrant that says, yes, we are adequately supporting employees and we're also pushing them with some challenge? It turns out that's really healthy. And employees tend to want to be challenged, right?
Right.
We want to have a clear idea of what's going on, know what the target is, know that it's a little bit out of reach, but also know that we've got somebody behind us who's really trying to help us get there and
Mhm.
wants us to get there and is going to throw resources at it to make sure that we get there. And when that happens, there's a high level of motivation and much greater success. So I don't know if that answers the question a little bit, but I think that's one of the ways that we can continue pushing and still be kind and compassionate.
Yeah, Akbar, let us know, or feel free to, of course, to reach out to Aaron or myself
Absolutely.
offline through LinkedIn. I'll just add what you're talking about. We call it efficacy here at Civility Partners. So we define employee engagement by inspiration, fit, and efficacy, which is exactly what you're talking about. People feel appropriately challenged so they can learn and grow. So anyway, well, thank you so much, Aaron, for spending time with me
Yeah.
today. It was a
Thanks
great
for having me.
conversation. Yeah. I'm happy to
Great.
have you. And I'm sure we will run across paths again, and it would be great to continue our conversation. It's always nice to find a buddy who has the same point of view as you.
For sure. For sure.
Confirmation bias all the way. All right.
Yes.
Thanks again. And I hope everyone